Able to dominate Reading politics is the crime syndicates. They know how to run campaign, they know how to collect money, they know how to run the city government, and quite often they've done it.
This is the story of misgovernment of the people, misgovernment by the people. It is the story of the corrupt city.
The city and its people. An Urban America production from Group W, the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company. Here is Group W Chief Correspondent Rod McLeish.
Corrupt basis of organized crime in the United States. It flourishes only where it has corrupted local officials. This city, Reading, Pennsylvania, has been crippled by organized crime. Whether Reading will fully recover is hard to say, but it can be said with certainty that organized crime is fighting to regain control of the city. If it succeeds, Reading is dead. Lieutenant John Haybecker, a tough, honest veteran cop, recalls the recent days when his city was totally corrupted.
Just a few short years ago, it was a lot easier to place a number bet or a horse bet. 1154. Almost any confectionery store, grocery store in the central part of the city anyway, you would be able to place a number play or horse bet. It was not at all uncommon within a 4-block radius to bump into 3 or 4 number riders. Doggone discouraging, to say the least, to be sitting in a restaurant having a meal and a number rider would come in and sit practically next to you and take his action. But even the nickel and the dime bet, you know, that seems so trivial. This all adds up. And it goes into the organized crime kitty.
We had nothing but a magazine store, candies, ice creams, cigarettes. And one day we were approached. We ever thought to write numbers? At first we thought no. When we was told of the profits that we could make, we said yes. The next day we were in the number business. Profit was 40% of the take. The business fluctuated, but it run anywhere from $2,000 to $2,500 a week.
How big a take was that citywide?
Roughly, it would be $200,000 a week. City officials were paid roughly 20%.
Reading has suffered from corruption on for the past 50 years. It has gone through constant cycles of corruption and reform. Today, it's in the waning days of another reform movement. Corruption hit its peak in Reading only a few years ago. A city of 100,000 people, Reading was worth more than $5 million a year in illegal gambling, alcohol, and prostitution. Presiding over this empire was one man, Abe Minker. He was known as the General. The nickname was apt, for he had vanquished the city. By the early 60s, he had consolidated all criminal activity in Reading and brought it under his control. He was able to do this only with the active cooperation of elected public officials. At one point, he had every level of government, with the exception of the local congressman and the city treasurer, in his hip pocket. That's the most painful part of the Reading story. The people had their government taken away. It happened because of the corruption of indifference and the corruption of public apathy. It happened because a wide segment of the population abdicated its responsibilities and thereby created a gaping political power vacuum. John Gardner, a criminologist and author of the forthcoming book, Law Enforcement, Corruption, and Urban Politics, has made a detailed study of the attitudes of Reading residents.
This lack of interest in being bothered leads them to a kind of remote or aloof attitude from city politics. They want the city to keep their tax rates down. They don't want the city to get involved in many expensive or innovative governmental programs. And we find a city with a population of 100,000 with no public fire protection. The city of Reading is protected against fire by a series of volunteer fire companies. The city buys the fire engines, but when the fire alarm rings, people dash out of their stores, race for the fire engine, and go off to the fire. Not only do the people of Reading not have public fire protection, the city doesn't even collect the trash from the houses around the city. Private collectors come and for a fee carry away your papers and rubbish. The city doesn't seem to get into much of anything. A major railroad still crosses the heart of town, and many times a day the trains will grind past the center of the shopping district and all traffic comes to a halt. Housing is predominantly 50, 60 years old. The city government hasn't gotten very far into the problem of providing housing for its population, except for building 2 apartment projects for the elderly. After 50 years of corruption, you find that the people of the city are unwilling to have any faith in their government, and you find that very few qualified leaders running for city government.
If you complete this week of sales...
Charles Wade is a wealthy Reading businessman. Wade used to be Reading's police chief. He was corrupt. Wade is an extremely complex human being. After building a successful business, he became a cop because he loved police work. His overriding ambition was to become chief. He made it by buying the job. From that moment on, he was on the take.
I know in my particular case, I didn't get to be chief of police because I solved the 10 most baffling murders. Nobody knew that I had bought the job. As I say, I didn't get the job of my past record, but I bought the job. It was a disgusting way to reach the pinnacle of what I always dreamed of. I was summoned to a meeting. At this meeting, I was told that I was going to get $100 a week. At the meeting was the mayor and also the general. I was also told that certain officers in my department, in other words, the top echelon, and fellows that were in a position, whether it may be a desk sergeant or a desk detective, were in a position to receive phone calls, which naturally would be on a complaint issues, they also would be taken care of. Well, my first question was, I thought I was going to be, pick the men in the department. I thought I was going to run the department. So, right away, Abe says to me, I don't hope you're that naive, but you feel that this is going to be the picture after the money we spent. So, he said, after all, you've got to look at it this way. You have an investment. You want to get some of your investment back. I said, well, not this particular way. He said, look, for years, everybody of any amount that had any top officers in this department were being taken care of. He said, it's an army that I have to support. Now, he said, you already paid me the $5,000. You don't want to lose that. You don't want to be busted. So you might as well go along. I guess that at the time, my ambition to be chief overshadowed any doubt as far as what the conditions in the future would be.
Wade, along with other top city officials, received kickbacks on all illegal activity in the city. This is Berks County Prison. Here, reporter Paul Altmeyer talked with a former madam who described how she had to pay off. This conversation was recorded with a hidden microphone with her consent, but without the consent of prison officials.
Can you tell me, what kind of payoffs did you have to make to the mayor and to the chief?
$75 a week.
So you paid $75 a week to the mayor. Overall, how much did you have to pay for protection?
I paid to the detective, right? $40 a month. It comes to $40.
The state cop knew that you were running a house of prostitution.
Yeah. I had to give him $10 every week.
You're in cell 15 and you look out over the woods. Back there you'll see down around the warden's house.
Spencer Wirtz, convicted numbers banker. Police estimate that his bank at one time took in $600,000 a year. He worked independently of the organization until they put the squeeze on him.
I take it he never want to get the same view again.
I had it a couple times, the same view. In fact, 4 times. So, I'm not ashamed of it. I mean, for what I've been in for, I didn't go in for stealing or anything. The stuff I was in for, why, it'll be legal someday anyhow.
What did you do time for?
Writing numbers. Well, a new crew, they wanted everything. They took what the little guy had and wanted everything themselves. They made the little guy work for them. They just tell you, you're writing for us or you ain't gonna write. So that's all there is to it.
The people we have seen and heard are the types you would associate with this kind of story. And you might be asking yourself, what's this have to do with me? Charlie Kessler is an average guy. 47, likes to ski. He follows baseball and football closely. He's a newspaper reporter. He used to cover City Hall in Reading.
One day I went with the Treasury agents on a number of raids where we picked up pinball machines. One of the places that we raided was a bar owned by the mayor's brother. The next day, or within a few days, I went back to City Hall on my regular beat, and lo and behold, the press room was locked. The window shades were drawn, and we had been locked out of the press room in City Hall by Mayor Mcbride. We decided to illustrate the lockout by having me carry a typewriter to the front steps of City Hall and show that I was working outside because I had been locked out. Well, after we took the photographs, I was carrying a typewriter back in, and there is the mayor and the chief of police waiting for me in the hallway. And the mayor turned to the chief and he said, "Lock that man up." I found out after I was released that the police department was following our delivery trucks. And every time a delivery truck would stop to throw off a bundle of papers on the corner, the police department would give the truck a ticket. And they wound up with, I forget the exact number, but several hundred tickets. They were doing this deliberately to harass the newspaper and to try to stifle the newspaper and to prevent the newspaper from printing the full story of rackets and gambling in Reading and Berks County.
We picked out our spot as being one described as pearl gray purity. We weren't against people gambling.
Jim Bamford runs a drug firm. He conducts adult education seminars at a local college. In the 50s, he was a reform mayor. His policy was pearl gray purity. This meant that gambling would be tolerated if it was not controlled by the rackets. Bamford's policy didn't work.
What we did, however, for those 4 long years was we annoyed the people who wanted a more liberal gambling racket situation than we were willing to put up with, and the people who wanted absolute purity felt that we had disappointed them.
Bamford's reform administration and his policy of pearl gray purity came to a crashing end, and the city was right back where it started.
The first 3 days they were in office, all the pinball games which we had permitted to operate were run out of the corner tap rooms, out of the grocery stores. Everything was going to be absolutely dreamy, and nobody was going to be able to gamble a nickel in the city of Reading. A week later, in the back door, moved the syndicate's pinball games, the syndicate's slot machines, everything else, and we had a wide open town.
The mayor made a statement to the newspapers that all pinball machines were illegal. So my phone started ringing from my various customers. Please take them out. We don't want to get in trouble. I sent my employees out to start pulling the machines out, and lots of lots of cases as my men pulled away with my truck. Another truck backed up that belonged to the mob, and they installed their machines.
Chuck and Joan Schwambach run the Queen of the Valley Diner just outside of Reading. They used to own a legitimate amusement machine company, but then the squeeze was put on them. Chuck Schwambach remembers what happened to his business.
Well, every year it just kept going down and down. First of all, I just bought an awful lot of various machines right before they came into par, and I had an awful lot of debt to pay off, so making payoffs to them and trying to meet my note payments and pay my help and live at the same time, it just got to the point it was impossible. We paid to the enforcer every Monday, but we didn't get any protection. Every week I lost more and more locations. They had racketeers going around and threatening my customers, so I'd lose maybe 1 or 2 a week.
They had some men come in from out of town, and they beat up on this one operator, amusement operator. And this one fella happened to get out of the place, and he called the authorities. And as we all knew, they told us this would happen. Nobody came. And that's the way it was all the time. Whenever you went to them,
You get called City Hall.
you just got a blank wall. Nobody ever paid any attention to you.
Well, I don't know now. I'm all but 50 years old and just a little too old to fight. I think if I had to do it all over again, I would have just plain quit, because those years were just hectic. I spent a lot of money going to see different doctors for my nerves. Took a lot out of me.
The federal government has been investigating organized crime in Reading off and on for the past 2 decades. Thomas Mcbride was chief prosecutor when the federal government moved in force into Reading in the early 60s. Mcbride is now counsel for the House Select Committee on Crime.
Reading seemed to me always to be a vacuum of leadership, a vacuum of people who cared deeply about the city, and one powerful man, driven by single-minded objectives, simply moved in on that vacuum. The normal business leadership, political forces seemed to evaporate. He took over. And once the pattern was set, he held control almost in a feudal sense for many years.
I would receive a call from one of Minker's chief lieutenants. He would call me and tell me that he wanted to meet me. This lieutenant had taken over the payoffs, so he was supposed to meet me at a designated spot. I would pull up with a police car, and he would come over and sit in the police car and discuss happenings of what had taken place. He'd ask me certain things regarding future protection for him. I was supposed to pass the orders around to arrest certain other number riders who would not be probably paying off their protection to them. Well, we would wind up our conversation usually by him conning out the money. For example, he would say, this is $100 for you, this is your weekly take, here's $100 for the captain, $50 for the lieutenant, and so on down the line. The weekly take might amount approximately about, I'd say in the neighborhood of $1,200, $1,250 that I would get in a lump sum. In turn, I would take it into City Hall and pass it to my one captain, who he in turn would pass it to the men. This is a spot where we used to pull in. It's a secluded section. We always met in my car for the simple reason that my car was the only one that had the recorder in. at times, I believe that this lieutenant's suspicions were aroused. This lieutenant was not one of the ordinary mill racketeer. This man had already done time and been convicted for killing another member of the racketeering element. He had been convicted and did at least 8 years in jail.
And I think one day there is a bullet for him. If they want to get a man, it may take 20 years to get him. They may wait, and eventually get him at one time.
Was there ever a contract out on him?
Yes. Contract called for $20,000.
Nobody took it.
They figured the man was too hot.
I never feared for my life. Not that I'm a brave guy. As I always said before, I mean, once you're dead, you don't feel a thing. And probably, I guess I'm too stupid to fear something of that sort. I know I've been threatened. Many times we've gotten phone calls. My wife has received the phone calls. Not just a threat on her life, but a threat with my grandchildren and so forth. If they can't hit you one way, then they're going to try to get at you where it really hurts. And they'll go all the way down the line with maybe your grandchildren or what have you.
How did the general, one man, one criminal, come to gain control of a city of 100,000? Shane Kramer, former director of the Pennsylvania Crime Commission and now head of the Justice Department Task Force in Philadelphia.
And what he did was sort of forge a conglomerate of crime, of the various criminal enterprises in the city of Reading over a period of years. And then in the mid-50s, he definitely signed on with the top national syndicate so that he had all the power of the national syndicate, although they had no direct representatives there. And so I suppose that what it is many years of constantly increasing his criminal business is what put Abe Minker in virtual control of the city of Reading.
Well, he told me not to interfere, just go along with what they wanted, because they planned years in advance who's going to be district attorney, who's going to be mayor, who's going to be sheriff and city council. And I shouldn't try to fight it.
He told us how his main joy in life was to maneuver people, and if they didn't suit him, crush them, get rid of them.
By having henchmen, strong-armed men, throwing fear into people. But as for the general himself, he was a nice man. He contributed large sums of money to his church. He never drove anywhere near a new car, maybe 2, 3 years old. He wanted people to think he was a poor man. Today he's worth $3 or $4 million in cash.
I decided that I would raid the number bank.
In 1965, former Chief Wade's testimony was instrumental in sending the general to federal prison on charges of extortion and conspiracy.
They did not want nobody to know what the receipts were because they were paying taxes to the government, but they were only declaring so much of the amount as taxes. I had buried the number slips, the real number slips, in a crawl space in this closet. All the number slips, and they were wrapped in a baby's clothes. Boxes, baby clothes boxes I had taken the clothes out of, so that in case anybody would break in, they wouldn't know what was in the boxes and probably not disturb them. This is the same material and evidence that I turned over to the federal government, which helped to break up the general and organized racketeering in the city of Reading.
Chief Wade, trying to justify his own conduct, would make it appear that he cooperated willingly. The hard fact is that he began to cooperate only after he himself was indicted for the crime of perjury. But yet, my contact with him in the many months that we questioned him and in the weeks of trial when he testified was of a man who genuinely was torn between an honest desire to see Reading cleaned up and an equally honest desire to save his own skin.
They wouldn't have had their corruption if they hadn't been asking for all of the gambling they've had.
Reading is no exception or any different than any other city of its size in this country.
Political campaigning in Reading is done at neighborhood social clubs. Here at the Ivy Leaf Club, the conversation is open. People talk about what's on their minds.
This gambling went on, and it will go on. If you and I is the last man on Earth, right, we're going to part for something.
You think it's still going on?
Why, certainly it's going on.
As bad as it had been?
I say just as much. You're going
Cut a lot of stuff out.
I think it's not in the syndicate or organized type of gambling.
That's a possibility. It's not the organized type of gambling. You still have it, and I don't see there's anything wrong with it. I say legalize gambling all through the state.
Yeah. I'm still 100% for a red light district. Ever since I know anything about voting, and I'm still 100% in favor of it. For a red light district licensed. Why? To protect our girls that smoke in the street today. What protection have they got?
You mean the morons that are walking the streets and attacking our kids?
That's right. You know it, and you know in 19 at an open district that wouldn't occur. Very, very little.
The majority of people here in the city of Reading are basically real good people.
Veteran City Councilman Joseph Kosminski is regarded as the most powerful Democrat in Reading, a city with a 4-to-1 Democratic registration.
Ladies and gentlemen, believe me, I am deeply gratified, and I owe this victory to an awful lot of my good friends here in the 18th Ward and throughout the entire city. I also owe a lot to the many people who have helped me during the campaign, and particularly to my wife and children, and believe me, last but not least, to my dear Lord, who gave me the strength to carry on in this campaign. Thank you very much.
Here's our next mayor.
Kosminski, with a powerful political base, is a strong candidate for mayor in 1971. He has served in city council during some of Reading's better times and during some of its darker periods.
I was just a junior councilman at that time, and I guess I was just not as politically smart as I should be in knowing everything that should be going on in the city. So I, like many of the other citizens in the city, actually did not know what was going on.
It is our duty to indicate to City Council.
The Reading City Council operates under the commission form of government. 5 members, including the mayor, sharing essentially equal powers, each with his own separate department. It's an archaic form of government. It's been described as a fraternity of tolerance. Former Mayor James Bamford.
It's a horrible form of government because you elect 5 people without a leader. You get endless bickering, you get endless plays for publicity, and you don't have the fixed responsibility, which I think you need for good local government.
Under this system, the mayor is no more than a horseless headman. Reading's current mayor, Victor Yarnell, is, like many of his predecessors, an amateur in politics. He is a school teacher. He heads Reading's current reform movement, which is in its last waning days. Yarnell himself holds few illusions about the future of reform in Reading. The senior member of council is William E. Leonardziak.
I don't think they'll ever stop gambling. I don't care who says they're going to stop it. I don't think they'll ever stop it. That's in the people's blood to gamble, and they'll gamble, no matter what it is.
They play politics pretty fast and hard here in Reading. You had a bar room, you were hit on a gaming charge, you were cleared of the gaming charge. Some people say it was political. Is this the way the game is played here?
I was never a number rider or a horse bookie or anything like that. I don't know the first thing about the horses, the numbers. I would say I know a little about it, but I never rode a number in my life. I never played a horse in my life outside. I was down the track 3 times. Every time I played them, I didn't know what. I lost money on it because I didn't know what it was all about. But I was arrested for on that charge, and was arrested under Republican administration that time. They claimed it was politics, but I don't know.
What's politics mean to you, Councilman?
Well, they don't mean nothing to me. I think politics is... Some politicians get elected, maybe they get elected on promising something, but I got elected promising nothing.
The legacy of organized crime is one of cynicism and apathy on the part of the people. I believe that they are suspicious of every public official who attempts to do a job, and that until they are willing to see good, honest government that is providing the type of service that they want, then and only then will this cynicism be removed, and then I hope that we can have the support that is so desperately needed by the people if they are to get off dead center and move ahead.
Reading's movement has been painfully slow, and during the height of the corrupt years, almost non-existent. Reading, as every American city, faces critical challenges, but the corrupt years have left it ill-equipped. Martin Bookbinder, chairman of the Reading Redevelopment Authority.
I think what we found, and what we knew we'd find when we got in, was a total lack of public improvements in the last 30 to 35 years. We've had a low tax base, which was fine. I mean, the people are very happy about that. They didn't have to pay high taxes, but they received nothing for what they did pay. There have been no improvements in the water department, or hadn't been a new playground built in 25 years. I mean, there are many things that should have been done, that could have been done, that were never even attempted. I don't think the city is dying, but I think the city has been going down. People have been moving to the suburbs, your intelligent people, the people who earn a little more money, and this is not just pertaining to the city of Reading.
This exodus of Reading's business leadership has left a political power vacuum, which at times in the past has been filled by hacks and crooks. Is the business and industrial leadership at fault? Has it been too apathetic? William McIlvaine, head of the Chamber of Commerce.
I feel it is not apathetic. Individuals might be. However, the Chamber does speak out on behalf of business, and we have taken a strong stand in the past against crime and corruption in this community. Well, the Chamber stand began in the early 50s, and then when these matters came to our attention in the late 50s and early 60s, the Chamber took a especially strong stand in order to change these conditions.
When our probes first started in Reading, there were some in the business community, some in the Chamber of Commerce, who indicated a desire to cooperate, or at least took a supportive stance with regard to our investigations. But when the chips were down, and the chips were down repeatedly in this investigation, when we were investigating payoffs on zoning, when we were investigating payoffs on city purchases, when we were investigating payoffs in street openings and in sewer placements, the business figures involved did not cooperate. And indeed, the major obstacle to success in our Reading investigation, and I would draw this conclusion based on other experience in other cities that I've had as a prosecutor, has been that the hardest roadblock, the highest roadblock, is to get those business witnesses to talk.
Do you plan to stay in Reading to live? How many people expect to stay in Reading or come back to Reading after graduation from college? Raise your hands. 4? 1, 2. We have problems.
Young, bright talent continues to desert the city of Reading at an alarming rate. Combine this with the exodus of the top business leaders to the suburbs, and the political power vacuum continues. Thus, the question really becomes, can organized crime step in and take over again?
Never. Well, I don't think, number one, any official in office would ever let it happen again. Secondly, I don't think the people of the city of Reading would ever stand for it.
Public officials did before, why not again?
Well, I think you have really different caliber of men today.
Certainly, as long as the citizens continue to want good government, they're going to have it. But if they don't want it, that's what they're going to get. In a democracy, the people get the type of government they deserve.
You might get some hungry guy in there as a mayor, can happen, anything can happen.
People don't care who gets elected to office. They don't care what they do when they're in office. And it becomes very simple for anybody to move in and take over.
Some sociologist claimed one time that the best government was a smart, crooked government. We unhappily have had crooked governments, but not smart ones, so we can't test the theory in Reading.
Reading, in its good old days, was worth $5 million to the local syndicate, and you can be sure that a syndicate will come back to pick up that kind of money again.
If I were to say here that I was approached since I've become chief, would that surprise you, Mr. Gardner?
No? Reading's current police chief, Bernard Dubinsky, with the top echelon of his department, 3 captains and 1 lieutenant. They are all veteran cops, ranging in service from 15 to 25 years. They've performed during honest administrations. They've endured or tolerated corrupt administrations.
How hard would it be to go back to the good old days in Reading?
Well, to begin with, there's so many people that have now not been part of this program that was here years ago, and I don't believe that they'd accept it.
I didn't quite catch what you meant by this, Captain. You said that the people are no longer here. You made a reference to the old-timers that had so much control.
That's right, a build-up over the years.
Racketeers.
That's right. Well, I wouldn't say racketeers, but a build-up over the year of the politicians and so forth. They controlled, I would say that the gambling element controlled a lot of the political maneuvering that had been going on.
The voters still have that prerogative of changing policies and getting from the government what they want. We're talking in broad terms now. So if they want a condition where they can play their 5 cents a day in the number slips, or have their places where they can play the horses and so forth, if they are given the opportunity, they will bring this about in an election. I've always considered it to be my top boss as a policeman to be the voters.
If something changed in the law enforcement picture in Reading, if policemen lost their present interest in enforcing all of the laws, how long would it be before organized crime was back in control of Reading again?
Mr. Gardner, I don't think it would take too long, because I really believe that there are individuals just poised on the springboard, just waiting for the department to relax. From information that has been given to me and from my personal contacts, any relaxation as far as the police department is concerned, I don't doubt that there would be a certain racket element ready to move in.
The move would be made against an essentially dispirited police department. Reading police, like most cops throughout the country, are underpaid. Society calls upon them for some impossible jobs. But the Reading cop suffers from something deeper, the scars of the corrupt years. Recently, an outside panel of police experts was called in to evaluate candidates for a top Reading police job. Their findings, made public here for the first time, are, quote, "What you have is the residual remains of temerity, habit, and limited imagination or fear." Not one presented the slightest potential of providing minimum police professional expertise. We have never seen a group of candidates with less spark, less enthusiasm or curiosity. Their general morale is low, and their pride, if any exists, is well hidden, end quote. It's a horrible indictment. It is a devastating legacy of corruption. A clean city requires at least 2 things: active law enforcement and elected public officials who actively oppose organized crime. District Attorney Robert Van Hoover is the chief prosecutor in Reading and Berks County. He claims his predecessors in the district attorney's office did all they could during the corrupt years.
As far as this office was concerned, I think it was well represented in the prosecution end of it. I think that it probably amassed one of the better records in court.
I think they were terribly, terribly ineffective. I guess in a word I'd say lousy.
As the so-called corruption cases were brought subsequently, of course each one fell on its face for different reasons. This is always a difficulty if you're involved in what usually is referred to as a witch hunt. And this is what I think Reading experienced in some respects.
Prosecutor, police, court must all work hand in hand if we're going to have effective crime prevention and crime control in any city. I saw little of evidence of effectiveness in Reading.
Is Reading today effectively combating organized crime? Does organized crime exist in Reading today?
It does exist. It must exist because the potential is there. The money is there. There's illegal money to be gained. And they're always ready to take advantage of it.
I think the measures which we've taken in this administration to make sure that organized crime is not functioning like it did in the past are sufficient.
It's a possibility because there's always that possibility. But as my personal opinion, I would say no.
I would say there is no organized crime at all. In fact, I do not even know of any unorganized crime.
Fortunately, it doesn't exist in our community now.
We have information, but there's constant information coming off the ethers in this area of organized crime that there may be an attempt in the process of the national syndicate once again coming in strength, at least making sure that its full representation is felt in the community.
Angelo Bruno is head of the Mafia family in Philadelphia. Recent FBI documents show that Bruno's holdings in legitimate businesses are substantial. This report uncovered the fact that within the last year, a longtime business associate of Bruno's has moved quietly into Reading. His name is Benjamin Golob. He lived in this apartment until shortly after our investigation began. In the recent explosive FBI Newark transcripts, Bruno lavished praise on Golob for the way Golob ran Bruno's businesses. Golob is currently manager of the National Cigarette Vending Company in Reading. Golob admitted to us that he has been a partner with Bruno in vending machine companies in Philadelphia and New Jersey. He's also been a partner with Bruno in a Caribbean gambling resort. Golob refused to appear on this report.
We are aware of this longtime associate of Bruno's moving into Reading, and we have watched him at a distance. We are very much interested in him. His background, his history is such that he's had a long association with Angelo Bruno, and that he is an expert in the operation of vending machine companies, so that we're interested and we are watching.
There are people within the city of Reading today who clearly want the city wide open, and they're willing to pay for it. Within the last 18 months, 3 city officials have been approached by the mob. They disclosed their stories publicly for the first time for this report.
Well, it occurred very soon after I took over this job. He visited me and made a suggestion that he would be an ideal man to have as my go-between the police and the racketeers that he knew so well. And he did this with quite a straight face, and I really felt that he thought this was a good idea. However, I didn't think too much of it, and of course I tended to laugh it off, and that was all we heard about it.
An approach was made to my co-campaign manager and myself, an offer of a lucrative offer, I could say, of a weekly contribution that would be made if certain things were done, a certain position arranged, and certain things let happen. But naturally, this was refused, turned down, and was dropped at that point.
What were the goals of the racketeers in this instance?
Well, I think they'd like to have things going exactly the way they were going up until 1963. Have a wide open community with numbers, horses, you name it, they had it.
About 6 months after my appointment to the office of chief, why, there was a gentleman come into my office and offered me a certain amount of money to be deposited in an account or paid in any way that I wished to be paid, to take less action and have the vice squad be pulled away from certain gambling surveillances. He was very, very discreet about it. He didn't make this comment in a loud voice. He came to my side of my desk and whispered in my ear as if he was afraid that my office was bugged. About a week or so later, or maybe 2 weeks, I could have to look in my date book. Another individual came in and offered me down there 5 times the amount that the original offer was. I reported this immediately to Mayor Yarnell, and this is the first that I've spoken about it to other than the mayor. The first offer was $100 a week. The second offer was $500 a week. And since at that time there has been no offers, I don't know whether they took me at my word. I hope they did. I haven't had any offers since then. This was definitely offered by a gambling, I wouldn't say syndicate, but a gambling group.
Organized crime crushed this city before. The city still hasn't fully recovered. The move is being made against Reading once again. The real question is whether the city's political leaders and economic leaders are ready for the challenge. If Reading doesn't wake up, it could be overrun again. If that happens, the city is dead.
Literally, its soul was stripped layer by layer, inch by inch. It was killed, in effect. And that this is the great evil of organized crime, that people lose their government. They have no control over it. Organized crime's whole purpose is to nullify visible government. And in a case like Reading, they succeeded.
In this report, we have tried not to be the man with the muckrake in Pilgrim's Progress who is able to look no way but downward. This has been the factual story of one city and what organized crime and corruption did to it. Organized crime might have appeared to you to be some harmless little game played by Damon Runyon-like characters, but it isn't. That simple 50-cent bet on the numbers has to go somewhere. If you're black and live in a ghetto and play the numbers, chances are you're making somebody who's not black very, very wealthy. The take from the numbers racket in Harlem alone is $1 million a month. Nationally, white organized criminals bleed the ghetto dry. The money from gambling, the money from loan sharking and other illegal activities is then poured into legitimate businesses. And that's where it hits all of us. It hits the housewife who pays more for milk from a mob-controlled dairy. It hits the homeowner who pays more to a mob-owned garbage collection company. The economic aspects are staggering. But the biggest hurt of all is what it does to government, as we've just seen. In many cities in the country, there's a much too comfortable relationship between organized crime and elected officials. The amazing thing is that we tolerate it. In many other countries, such alliances do not exist because the public wouldn't sit still for them. But we do. Adlai Stevenson once said, "Your public servant serves you right. Indeed, often they serve you better than your apathy and indifference deserves." On this report, Reading's Mayor Yarnell said, "The people get the type of government they deserve." That's true. That's very true. This is Rod McLeish.
The recognition by those communities which surround the city, and particularly the county government, that we're all in this thing together.